Good evening, everyone. It's really very nice to welcome you in person to this lecture this evening. Some of you have seen the exhibition that's just opened. It's up for 3 months. Please come back. I am sure you'll come back many times. I'm Colin B. Bailey, the director of the Morgan Library and Museum. New York ist scharf auf Zeichnungen aus Dresden. New York is hot for drawings from Dresden. This is a headline of a magazine that I discovered for the first time, Tag 24, Day 24, which I do not think is a very eminent magazine, but this exhibition has already received its imprimatur, and we look forward to more serious reviews of the exhibition as the weeks go on. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Stephanie Book this evening. This is the opening inaugural lecture of Van Eyck to Mondrian, 300 years of collecting in Dresden, and it remains on view until January 23rd. As you probably know, it's the only only venue in America for the exhibition. Established by August the Strong, Elector of Saxony, in 1720, the Kupferstich-Kabinett is one of the oldest and finest depositories of works on paper in the world. It forms part of 15 institutions from the Dresden State Art Collections, the SK d'Art, one of the foremost museums of the world, composed of several million objects. And this body of museums is led by General Director Marian Ackermann, to whom I'm profoundly grateful, as I am to her staff, and particularly the staff of the Dresden State Art Collections. The exhibition is a survey both of Western European draftsmanship and of some of the masterworks from the Kupferstich-Kabinett itself. We're showing around 60 drawings made between the early 15th century and the late 20th century, including sheets by Cranach, the Elder, Rembrandt, Caspar David Friedrich, Francisco Goya, Kate Kollwitz, and Georg Baselitz. Most remarkably, and this is a great loan and great generosity from Dresden, the exhibition includes Jan van Eyck's portrait of an elderly man, an exceptionally rare drawing by the great Netherlandish Renaissance painter that is making its first visit to the United States. It builds on a program at the Morgan, well established, to present to the American public distinguished works from outstanding institutions abroad. And this is something that has been particularly meaningful in the present climate. The exhibition was intended to celebrate the 300th anniversary of the founding of the Kupferstich-Kabinett. It's celebrating its 301st birthday because we had to postpone it for a year because of the pandemic. But just think of that, 301 years, that's a very long time to have established a print and drawing collection. I'm very grateful to my colleagues at the Morgan. The exhibition has been led by Dr. Ostea Macaleta, the Annette and Oscar de la Renta, assistant curator in the Department of Drawings and Prints. She and our exhibition organizing staff, our preparators, our designers, our educators, our publications department. Just to make the point that should be made, it takes a museum village to bring a show like this to fruition on the walls. And I hope you'll agree with me that it looks elegant, dignified, and very moving in our Morgan Stanley Gallery. I'm also going to recognize the many donors who share our commitment to fine drawing and old master and modern drawing who have supported the display. The exhibition was made possible by an anonymous donor in memory of Melvin R. Seeden. Generous support provided by the William Randolph Hearst Fund for Scholarly Research and Exhibitions, the Wolfgang Ratschen Foundation, the Christian Humann Foundation, Mr. and Mrs. Clement Moore, Elizabeth and Jean-Marie Everyard, Joe Carroll and Ronald Lauder, and the Samuel Kress Foundation, also with assistance from the Arnhold family in memory of Henry Arnhold. Above all, this project has been very generously the programming has been very generously supported by the Consulate General of the Federal Republic of Germany in New York. And before introducing our speaker, it's a pleasure to invite Consul General David Gill to share a few words with us. David, thank you.
Thank you and guten Abend, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, dear Colin Bailey, liebe Frau Dr. Book, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of the German Consulate General here in New York to this magnificent exhibition with masterpieces of more than a half of a millennium. Congratulations to the Morgan Library and the Dresden Kupferstich-Kabinett, to the great cooperation which enables us here in New York to view some of the most precious treasures of art collected in Dresden during the last 300 years. I can't tell you how pleased we are to support this wonderful and outstanding German-American, this transatlantic project. It does indeed accompany our mission at the consulate to strengthen the ties between our countries and continents, in this case, in the field of the arts. I would like to thank the Morgan Library and Colin and his whole team for hosting this special event. Germany feels fortunate to have such a long-lasting and close partnership with this outstanding institution, a beacon of creativity and a meaningful engagement with literature, music, history, and the arts here in the city and beyond. But we would not be here today without the Dresdner Kupferstich-Kabinett and its director, Dr. Stephanie Book. It is your commitment and restless endeavor and the commitment of your team that we can celebrate, as we heard, the 300th anniversary of the oldest publicly accessible special collection for art on paper in the German-speaking countries, not only in Dresden, but today and in the coming weeks also in New York. Finally, since, as you heard, we had to be patient due to the pandemic. And I have to add a personal note. I'm not only officially pleased as Consul General about this great exhibition, it is also on a very personal level. Liebe Frau Book, you brought a little part of my original home to my temporary home here in New York City. I grew up only 50 miles east of Dresden, and when my family traveled to the big city, which looked, when I was a child and a teen, very different from what you see here, then of course we visited all the wonderful museums in Dresden, and we viewed also the great art of the Kupferstich-Kabinett. Thank you for this very special gift. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we will not only see artistic highlights from more than 5 centuries, but also the dedication, the enthusiasm, and the passion of those who made this exhibition already now a great success. We are truly grateful for this. And to all of you, welcome again. Enjoy the lecture and the exhibition and the evening.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much for your kind words and for the personal reminiscence as well. Now it's a pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker, Dr. Stephanie Book, the director of the Dresden Kupferstich-Kabinett. Stephanie is a specialist in early German and Netherlandish drawings. She has led the institution in Dresden since 2015. Under her leadership, the Kupferstich-Kabinett has embarked on a number of ambitious projects, including an exhibition in 2019 on Rembrandt, an in-depth study of its collection of Italian Renaissance drawings, sponsored by the Getty Paper Project, and a series of exhibitions and catalogues that highlight the museum's rich collection of Chinese and Indian miniatures, some of which are also on view in the gallery. And as Steffi will also explain to us, this is an institution that is deeply committed to the collecting of modern and contemporary drawings as well. Before assuming her role in Dresden, Dr. Book spent 9 years as a curator of drawings at the Courtauld Gallery in London, where she organized internationally acclaimed exhibitions on Albrecht Dürer, Michelangelo, Francisco de Goya, among others. And my personal note is that our collaboration really began about 10 years ago on a project to bring master drawings from the Courtauld to the Frick collection, which was an exhibition I still remember with great fondness. In her 2002 catalogue of early Netherlandish drawings in the Berlin Kupferstich-Kabinett, the drawings collection in Berlin, is one of the defining publications in the field in which she is an authority. It's so good to have you here, Steffi. Please welcome Dr. Book to the podium.
I just start with a sip of water. Many thanks, Colin, for your very warm introduction. I'm honored and I'm delighted to be here with you and all the wonderful colleagues and guests with Ostea and everybody else. It's very, very special to be given the opportunity of an in-person talk in these very difficult times that hopefully that will ease up, continue to ease up in the future now, generally, everywhere in the world. Lieber Generalkonsul Gill, dear colleagues and friends and ladies and gentlemen, it has been 6 years since Colin and I first spoke about the possibilities of an exhibition of masterworks from the Dresden Kupferstich-Kabinett, as he just said, and we quickly agreed that this show should come to the Morgan in the fall of 2020. The year 2020 making, as you have heard, the 300th anniversary of the founding of our museum by the Saxon ruler Augustus the Strong. You can easily imagine how different and a bit sad these so-called celebrations turned out compared to what we had planned, all because of that pandemic. I am thus particularly thrilled that exactly 1 year later, we do celebrate together with you, and there couldn't be a better place than here in that great city, New York, that has always proven to be able to cope with difficulties. Despite all differences between a small city like Dresden and a mega capital like New York, both places have a comparable spirit when it comes to facing challenges. Dresden has experienced severe periods of destruction. The most devastating and best known is the fire raid in 1945 at the end of World War II. It left the heart of the city in ruins, including the palace where the Kupferstich-Kabinett is now housed in beautiful premises as one of 15 museums united under the umbrella of the State Museums of Dresden. The famous Green Vault and the Old Master Picture Gallery are among these museums. And my slide should give you just an impression of the splendor of the Baroque ensemble. The reconstruction of the palace is still in progress, and it might come as a surprise to you that we still are reopening pretty much every year newly reconstructed galleries. The consequences of the war and of the Nazi horrors are still very much part of our presence in Dresden. In 1937, 381 works by artists banned as allegedly degenerate were seized and finally sold by the Nazi state. Some individual pieces were also destroyed. After the war, the collection of then about 500,000 prints, drawings, and photographs was brought to Russia. The majority of works returned to Dresden in 1958 already. However, for a variety of reasons, which I will not explore in this talk, about 10% of the collection has not returned. About 5,000 drawings and 45,000 prints are still missing, as well as the research library, which is a great loss for our scholarship. Individual works do show up on the market regularly, some easily identifiable when showing one of the Dresden collection marks, some having their mark erased. A group of master drawings we know of is kept in Russian museums, and Cranach's sleeping nymph here on view, probably among them. Other sheets might have been destroyed. The return of individual works to the collection, such as the drawing by David Teniers and by Gillis Knights in the slide, is still met with excitement by the Dresden public today. Whilst we cannot search for lost sheets systematically, provenance research of works that might have entered the collection unlawfully during the Nazi regime has played an important role at the Kupferstich-Kabinett for many, many years and will continue to do so in the future. To return a work to its rightful owner means a real success to us, and sometimes the process of restitution becomes the basis of new friendships with the families. World War II was not the only destructive moment in the history of Dresden. Much earlier, during the 7 Years' War between 1756 and 1763, the city suffered destruction. It was the time when Bellotto was working in Dresden and its surroundings in Saxony and created a magnificent series of paintings and etchings, of which one is included in our exhibition. The view captures the beauty of the River Elbe with a cityscape in 1748, the towers and domes, grand architecture recently erected by the electors, and this view presents Dresden very much like you would find it today when you'll come and visit, which you will surely do, hopefully, at some point. Bellotto also depicted one of the churches, the Church of the Holy Cross, after its destruction by the Prussian army during the 7 Years' War, giving a very similar picture of a mountain of rubble as it did the destroyed Frauenkirche that had stayed all the same after World War II throughout the time of the GDR until its reconstruction and rebuilding in the early 2000s, achieved with the great help of the American Friends of Dresden. It is this span of about 300 years that I will try to give you a glimpse of on a brief journey through the history of the Kupferstich-Kabinett. As my time is limited, I will focus on the early history, spending also some time on a close reading of the unique drawing of Jan van Eyck executed in the mid-1430s that is the star of the exhibition. Among the around 60 masterpiece drawings on show, our poster child is the oldest drawing, the youngest being works produced in the GDR in the mid-1960s and 70s, such as R.R. Penk's Head of a Girl. The majority of drawings on view are by German artists, but you can also find Netherlandish giants such as Rembrandt and Rubens, Italian Renaissance works by Correggio and Bronzino, marvelous study by Watteau, and one of Goya's unsettling brush drawings from one of his private drawing albums. And, as is unusual, as Colin said, for European prints and drawings collections, we brought examples of our early Asian collection. You can encounter a large group of self-portraits, another speciality of the Dresden collection, 2 women among them, Sophonisba and Käthe Kollwitz. Male dominance is as much part of our story of the canon as it is in the US and other countries. Keeping in the present, the title of this talk and of the catalog points to an important part of our identity, the acquisition of contemporary works, be it directly from the artists. Many produced their works directly for or in dialogue with the court and later the directors and curators, be it with the artists' estates or with collectors who had formed their collections in conversation with contemporary artists. The dialogue with artists is still an important focus of our work at the Kupferstich-Kabinett, and this includes site-specific commissions allowing to freshly rethink the medium of drawing. And my example is here Monika Gemala's installation Stop Motion, a festive drawing in space made for the glazed palace courtyard that celebrated our anniversary last year. And you know Monika well from her earlier work done here at the Morgan and elsewhere here in New York. At the same time, it was always understood in Dresden that the past is part of the present In order to build a meaningful future, past and present need to be in a close and continuous dialogue. The interest in historic works, both prints and drawings, was thus always given a given strength as to be experienced in our selection of master drawings. But let me now start in the beginning. In 1720, Frederick Augustus I, known as Augustus the Strong, Elector of Saxony and King of Poland, took the decision to fundamentally reorganize his existing art and natural history collections. These had been assembled by his predecessors since the Renaissance in the 16th century. In keeping with the spirit of the European courts at the time, Augustus, Elector of Saxony, had begun assembling a so-called Kunstkammer, or Cabinet of Curiosities, in 1560. This was greatly expanded over the next 150 years. Characterized by its encyclopedic ambitions, this collection included examples from all realms of nature, stones, plants and minerals, animals, as well as art objects and artifacts. Augustus the Strong had come to power young, as a 24-year-old man in 1694. As Prince Elector, he had undertaken his grand tour of Western Europe in the late 1680s and became acquainted with the culture of the courts of Italy, Portugal, and Spain, as well as the most magnificent of all courts, that of Louis XIV at Versailles. The Sun King was to remain a shining example to him throughout his life. We may assume that Augustus's decision to create a special collection of works on paper as part of the systemization of the Kunstkammer's holdings was encouraged by Louis XIV's pioneering establishment of the Cabinet des Estampes, and that's the Cabinet of Prints in 1667, and the Cabinet des Dessins, the Cabinet of Drawings 5 years later, each run separately. In contrast to these institutions in Paris, Augustus's special museum incorporated both prints and drawings. The Kupferstich-Kabinett is thus the first independent museum of works on paper in the German-speaking world. Augustus the Strong appointed his personal physician, Johann Heinrich von Heucher, as its first director, who also oversaw the natural history collections. At the time of its foundation, the exact name of the museum had still not been established. The terms Estampes-Kabinett, Kupferstich-Salon, and Kupferstich-Galerie are all documented. All options stress the importance of the prints over the drawings. Kupferstiche, that is engravings, being used as a synonym of all prints, while the word cabinet emphasizes the intimacy of the place. Salon underscores its communicative role. Gallery, pointing to the representative display of these works on the wall. All three aspects embody the Kupferstich-Kabinett as an institution still today. Our museum continues to be defined by its protective enclosure, as well as discursive openness, found in the public study room, and by its program of exhibitions, many of which with international loans. Augustus had inherited a Renaissance castle as residency. Like his predecessors, he had it modernized to accommodate the needs of his court. In addition, from 1711 on, he had a large palatial complex newly constructed in the area adjacent to the castle, and that is the Zwinger. It served as an orangerie and garden, as well as a representative festival area. In 1719, a year before the foundation of the Kupferstich-Kabinett, it saw the superbly magnificent wedding celebrations of Prince Elector Frederick Augustus II and Maria Josepha, daughter of the Holy Roman Emperor. These festivities represented the Saxon elector's imperial claim to power and were a milestone in dynastic self-representation. As such, they were to be documented through graphic means, allowing them to live on in internal memory. After these extraordinary festivities, the architectural ensemble was converted into a Palais des Sciences. From 1728 on, the Kupferstich-Kabinett found its prestigious location in one of the pavilions, alongside with several other of Augustus's newly created collections. the treasures housed in the cabinet could be viewed by appointment, on an accompanied tour, and for an entrance fee. The first years of his tenure, the newly appointed director of the Kupferstich-Kabinett set out to organize systematically the holdings of the Kunstkammer. At the same time, he made substantial acquisitions for the collection. In the Kunstkammer, Heucher found a variety of works, including those made by the Renaissance dukes themselves. For example, a book of perspective that the young Prince-Elector Christian I had drawn in 1576 here on view under the guidance of his drawing teacher Hans Lenker. Also drawings by the artist and connoisseur Gabriel Kaltemarkt, who authored a treatise in 1587 on how a Kunstkammer should be formed, advising the dukes on the canon of artists to be represented in the collection. The Kupferstich-Kabinett has always been conceived as a universal collection, thus it does not only have strong local sources but also global roots. An example is this exquisite mid-17th century book of portraits of Indian rulers. A handwritten note in German language in the book is dated 1689, suggesting that it had entered the Kunstkammer by then. In praise of its quality, the note says, "This book is of particularly great value." There was a lively interest in works from non-European cultures, especially from Asia, and the Asian collection would grow under Augustus's reign when large groups of Chinese prints and drawings entered the collection from various sources, Dresden having more than 1,000 of these sheets. A particularly fine example in the exhibition is a series of Chinese landscapes with pavilions executed during the late Ming dynasty in the first half of the 17th century. Acquired in 1728 at the sale of the collection of Niklas Witzen in Amsterdam. According to the 1587 inventory of the Kunstkammer, there was also a so-called Illuminated book of Turks, which Elector Augustus graciously received from Mr. David Ungnad and had painted by Zacharias Wehm. That was a quote. The imperial counselor David Ungnad was an ambassador in Constantinople in the mid-1570s. During his stay, he had a so-called Türkenbuch, a book of Turks created for him, visually documenting the customs and ceremonies of the Ottomans. Zacharias Wehm served as a court artist in Dresden when he was asked to copy this book. After Wehm's death, his estate was sold in 1608. It included 27 drawings of birds and game, one of which must be the beautiful, colorful bird of paradise in the exhibition. Such birds were admired as so-called wonders of nature at the time. The first specimens reached Europe in 1522 in the form of preserved bird skins. They were a gift from the Moluccans, who believed that the birds came from the earthly paradise and that their feathers, when worn by rulers, would make them invincible. Birds of paradise made thus a brilliant gift of honor and entered the court collections. One of these skins is documented in the Kunstkammer in 1587. It may have been the model for Wehm's large nature study. The drawing depicts the bird lying down, seen from behind, with an additional detailed study of its head, seen from the side. The feathery plumage has been beautifully executed in nuanced shades of brown, onto which the artist added the delicate feather structures with the point of the brush. Wehm is an interesting figure in the early history of the Kunstkammer. Born in Dresden, the Elector had sent him as a boy to Wittenberg to be apprenticed to Lucas Cranach the Younger, where he stayed for 10 years until 1581, when he returned to Dresden and was kept in great esteem by the Elector. He must have known the animal studies by Lucas Cranach the Elder and his workshop, a superb group of watercolors represented by 2 examples here in our show. A nearly life-size nature study of 2 dead partridges impresses with its accomplished depiction of the varying textures of their plumage, the light, soft, almost airy down feathers and the darker, firmer wing feathers. The combination of loose, broad, and flat brushwork with more nervous strokes applied with the point of the brush demonstrates Lucas Cranach's own hand, as does the skillful rendering of the birds' limpy, hanging bodies, their uncanny physicality emphasized by the shadows swiftly rendered in wash and cast on the wall on which the birds are hung after having been hunted down. The white paper is representing this wall. Seemingly effortless, Cranach transformed it into real space by his swift, evocative mark. Hunting deer and wild boar were among the most popular pastimes for the dukes. In his eulogy of 1509, humanist and writer Christoph Scheuerl described Cranach as a quick and skillful draftsman, well trained by constant practice, who also accompanied his sovereigns on hunts to study the wild animals. A fine and particularly large example is the drawing of a young stag, probably intended as a preparatory nature study for paintings, in particularly for hunting and paradise scenes. Beautifully placed on the sheet of paper, the animal's contour leaves an exquisitely decorative effect. Unlike the birds, this stag appears to have been drawn from a life model. Not only have the bones and muscle structure been skillfully sculpted in their taut state, and the physicality of the animal's body emphasized by unusual lighting, which effectively highlights the fur of the shoulder blade, flank, and hindquarters. Especially remarkable is the vivid rendering of the dark, shiny eye, with the shy stag's attentive gaze and alert, slightly retreating posture, all captured in this master drawing. We do not know how these and other superb animal studies by Cranach, Behme, and other court artists were kept in the Dresden Kunstkammer. The generally good and sometimes even pristine state of conservation speaks for careful storage or display. And I highlight in this slide the gorgeous watercolor of Cranach's two dead waxwings that are not here in the show, so you must come to Dresden and have a look there. What we do know is Heucher's approach to these works when integrating them into the new collection of prints and drawings. Our most recent research done during the pandemic shed light on the early collection history when we examined one of the altogether about 550 bound albums that are still preserved in the Kupferstich-Kabinett. Its title, Chiffres à déchiffrer, is embossed with gold letters on the worn brown calf leather binding, probably dating from the early 18th century. An ordinary handwritten paper label on the book spine describes the book's content as cerf, bois de cerf, et volaille, stags, deers, antlers, and poultry. This label dates from around 1738, when Heucher drafted the first inventory of the Kupferstich-Kabinett's collection. The works were stored in 22 cabinets, each dedicated to particular groups of works. The first cabinet containing Italian masters, the second works related to natural history. Cabinet number 17 contained a volume en veau brun contenant des estampes chiffrées, dont le nom des maîtres sont encore à déchiffrer. This is our album containing at the time of the entry prints whose masters had still to be identified. They were probably kept in the volume as loose sheets. After the successful identification, these prints were integrated into the correct cabinets. This research of identification must have been successful as the entry was crossed out in the inventory. After having been emptied, the volume Chiffres à déchiffrer was reused for other works, which were depictions of birds, stags, and antlers. According to the numbering, 38 pages were used, including works by the Cranach workshop, Behme, Göding, and others. As such, we find the book in cabinet number 2 as volume titled Chiffres à déchiffrer, but containing a number of drawings of stags, antlers, and birds. Other large-scale studies of antlers were rolled up in a grand rouleau. Over the time, the most prominent works were removed from the volume to be matted individually. The 3 animal studies here on view in our exhibition were among this group. The reconstruction of the album hasn't been fully completed, but a start is made, and I'm just pleased to draw attention to this new research here today. In the busy first years of the Kupferstich-Kabinett, Director Heucher was also highly successful in enlarging the holdings of the prints and drawings. In 1728, the year our institution moved to its new quarters in the Zwinger, the collection of the Leipzig alderman Gottfried Wagner was acquired from his widow, Clara Katharina. Comprising more than 10,000 drawings, this spectacular collection of drawings is the largest group that ever entered the Dresden collection and lays the foundation for the Kupferstich-Kabinett's Old Master drawings. Wagner probably acquired the majority of the works at Leipzig fairs, but also during his travels to France, England, and the Netherlands. The Wagner collection encompasses works by German, Dutch, Italian, and French schools of the 16th and especially the 17th century. Over the course of several years, Heucher and the court artist Louis de Sylvestre sorted the holdings thematically and arranged them in 25 volumes, divided into 3 tiers based on artistic quality. Soon after 1738, drawings that were then attributed to Rembrandt were compiled in a separate album. These volumes were kept intact for about 1 century, but were later emptied, just like the volume Chiffres à déchiffrer, often with little care for the ensemble, as sheets were cut or torn out, including bits of the blue mounting paper. Many of our finest drawings came with Wagner's collection. The slide shows you those sheets now on view in the exhibition, including Andrea del Verrocchio's exquisite silver point drawing of the Madonna with the brooch, as well as beautiful Netherlandish Mannerist drawings by Peter Candid, Müller, and Goltzius, not to forget the Rembrandts. The Dresden collection of Rembrandt drawings is very strong indeed and has been well published. In our selection, we included 2 sheets. The superbly dynamic early study of Ganymede is one of the few drawings directly connected to one of the master's paintings, also kept in Dresden since the mid-18th century, so that arrived later in the collection than the drawing. The second sheet is by the late Rembrandt. In fact, it is one of his latest and largest drawings executed with a combination of scratchy reed and flexible goose and quill pens, the wash broadly applied with a brush on coarse Dutch paper. Powerful in its energetic mark-making, surprising in the take on the story of Ovid's Metamorphoses. We see the chaste goddess Diana cruelly transforming the hunter Actaeon, who had watched her and her companions bathing, into a stag. Following their animal instincts, Actaeon's dogs will tear their master to pieces. Rembrandt used a landscape format, simultaneously portraying the moment of discovery and the subsequent transformation of Actaeon, who stands to the right on an elevated ground behind a large tree trunk. The antlers have already begun to grow from the surprised hunter's head. The 7 young women at lower left are in a state of commotion and turn from all directions to face the spectacle. The voyeur's fated death, as well as the question of whether this was a reasonable punishment for what this man had done, are hinted at the figure's movements. The use of a close-up perspective engages the viewer in an intense confrontation with life and death. The concise postures and varied facial expressions produce a sense of great vitality and urgency. The story's turning point is revealed in the visual relationship between Diana and her companions on the one hand side and Actaeon. For a long time, it was assumed that Jan van Eyck's famous silver point drawing also came from the Wagner's collection. This does, however, not seem to be the case. What does hold true is the drawing's superlative status in the history of Northern European drawing as the first work that can undoubtedly be associated with an individual artist, despite being unsigned and undated, just like all the other early Netherlandish drawings of the 15th century that have been preserved until today. We now think Van Eyck's portrait was part of the collection formed by the Dresden court painter Christian Dietrich, called Dietrici. It contained 197 Old Master drawings when it was acquired by the Kupferstich-Kabinett in 1774. These were mounted in an album. About 50 years later, the museum made an attempt to reorganize its entire drawings collection and then also removed individual works from the Dietrich album, including a so-called old head, which, quote, appears to have been made by a Florentine Old Master. This note most likely refers to Van Eyck's sheet, as no other drawing at the Kupferstich-Kabinett fits that description at all, and we did search very thoroughly. The attribution to an Italian artist of the Quattrocento is understandable, since the art historical research on early Netherlandish painting and drawing was at that time still in its very early stages. The first publication on Van Eyck by Johanna Schopenhauer, and that's the mother of the influential philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, and Gustav Friedrich Wagen, did not appear until 1822. After its removal from the album, the sheet was on display in the Kupferstich Gallery in the Zwinger. It is there where the Frankfurt painter and early art historian Johann David Passavant saw it displayed on the wall in 1841. He had a list available, published by the then Cabinet's director Johann Gottfried Frenzel, which described all works on the walls and in display frames, including, quote, a very rare original drawing in silver point by Johannes van Eyck. Whilst Frenzel had made the right attribution to Van Eyck, it was Passavant who first recognized the drawing as being a preparatory study for Jan van Eyck's oil painting in Vienna. Passavant describes the sheet as, quote, a delightful drawing for this painting by Johann van Eyck. It is executed with silver point on paper, very simple, yet extremely true and ingenious in its realization. The shaded areas are diagonally hatched. This sheet also contains a great deal of handwriting that has almost disappeared and will probably be worth the effort to decipher, unquote. By that point, the name of the portrait's subject had already been forgotten. The man was believed to be Jodokus Veit, the donor of Van Eyck's famous Ghent altarpiece. Later, in 1902, Max Rose determined the sitter to be Niccolo Albergati, a strict Carthusian monk from Bologna who was awarded the cardinalate in 1426 and acted as a diplomat on behalf of the Pope in the Treaty of Arras between Burgundy and France. In 1435, where Van Eyck is thought to have made the portrait drawing. The basis for Rose's association with Van Eyck's portrait was an inscription still preserved in 1659 on a frame of the Viennese painting, but now lost. More recent research suggests, however, strongly that the frame was not Van Eyck's original one. The identification of the sitter with Albergati, eagerly followed in most 20th century scholarship, has to be questioned and ultimately dismissed. One of several arguments is that the sitter is not wearing the large tonsure that was obligatory for these Carthusian monks who were ordained priests and certainly followed by the very strict Albergati. Presumably, Van Eyck's model was a scholar whose name is unknown to us. The identification perhaps seemed particularly attractive as one could imagine the sitter Albergati, a prince of peace, later to be beatified face to face with the true prince of painting, Jan van Eyck. But is it so much worse not to know the historical background and just trust our eyes as a guide in our personal encounter with this individual, evoked by the meticulous marks of the draftsman that magically let his head appear before us. No matter whom the drawing depicts, it is a study after life, recording the encounter of two men, spending time with each other, long time, sitting and looking. Without haste, line for line, Van Eyck translated his observations into the textures and colors of the face in a meticulous monochrome system, predominantly made up of parallel hatching and the finest of marks. Under high magnification, these are clearly distinguishable. However, the lines are so closely spaced and tightly arranged that a gradual sculpting effect is achieved. When modeling the head, Van Eyck avoided a clear delineation from the background, unlike the more concisely sketched torso, which he captured with longer strokes. The head seems to have miraculously emerged from the paper, sculpted by light that illuminates the body from the left. Van Eyck must have gotten very close to the man. This is clear from the artist's countless notes and meticulous descriptions of the tonalities of the face, which he would use to translate his observations into a colorful painting when the subject no longer sat before him. These notes are arranged in 16 lines as a block of text next to the head, mostly illegible when looking at them in normal reflective light, but decipherable under UV light. Their position suggests Van Eyck wrote them down after the figurative drawing had been completed. The creative process probably went through several phases, oscillating between observing the sitter and capturing the visual impression in image and words. First, Van Eyck observed the man and drew the figure. Then his eyes scanned the face again. From top to bottom, he described the colors of the face, from hair to chin. While the dark yellow eyes, gray beard stubble, and whitish purple lips were still perceptible from a more respectful distance, the artist needed to get very close to recognize that, quote, the eyeball around the pupil was brown-yellow and around it against the white bluish, unquote. How, though, is the role of the monochrome drawing to be understood in the preparation for the panel painting? Did it emerge, as it is generally assumed, as the most realistic means of documenting the life model? The beard stubble in the drawing contradicts this idea. Its hue is carefully recorded in the notes, and it is prominent in the painting, but not even hinted at in the drawing. Van Eyck noticed the stubble, but refrained from sketching it, and deliberately abandoned the strategy of reproducing everything as accurately as possible. The specific use of silver point also suggests that Van Eyck attributed a more complex role to the drawing in his working process than mere mimesis. Technical analysis of the drawing showed that Van Eyck used gold point in addition to 2 silver points. Metal pencils with double points were available in the Netherlands at the time. Roger van der Weyden depicted one in the hand of St. Luke drawing the Virgin. Silver points make strokes that tarnish to appear olive brown over time, while the line of the gold point stays gray. In Van Eyck's drawing, both hues can be found in the man's eyes. While the iris is gray, the eyeball and the lid appear brownish, just like the rest of the face. A comparison of the eyes in the drawing with those in the painting surprisingly reveals that the man had brown eyes, a color that could have been more directly imitated by the silver point than by the gold point. Because of the complexity and meticulousness of the drawing, it can be assumed that Van Eyck chose the tools deliberately. Thus, mimetic representation or approximation was not the first and only priority of the drawing. Rather, Van Eyck left the description of the colors to the words. In his drawing, the artist therefore was less concerned with the sensory observations of the surface and color central to the painting. In the drawing, we can imagine all things between the lines. In the painting, we are told. What then did Van Eyck capture on the sheet of paper? I think he experienced the personal features during the act of drawing, encounter the uniqueness of the sitter's physiognomy. Being conscious of the different qualities of drawing and painting as media, he would evoke and recreate the body with color when working in oil. When working on paper in monochrome, he interpreted the factual visual information of the body more freely. Like many other great draftsmen and women after him, Van Eyck must have realized the potentials of drawing in monochrome on paper. The support's open texture and the reduced color scheme with a more abstract, less sensual approach to the depiction of the visible world serves as a space that facilitates and engages the viewer actively as we fill in and thus complete the image in our minds. By choosing the gold point, Van Eyck introduced an ever so slight media change which draws our attention to the man's eyes and enlivens and directs his gaze. Without following the demands of mimetic depiction, it brings the man alive. Here we can see Van Eyck's supreme command over this medium, his visual understanding, and his experienced pictorial strategies in capturing living nature. Although the drawing doubtlessly functioned as workshop material in the production of the painted portrait, we can capture an artistic act beyond simple recording. The drawing suffered badly from what must have been very long exposure to the light, as Passavant documented already in 1841. Otherwise, it is well preserved. Neither color stains, often to be found on workshop material from that time, nor other signs of careless treatment are visible. It seems to have been a cared-for sheet, perhaps always by artists, until it probably became one of the treasures of Christian Dietrich in the 18th century. Whoever were the earlier owners of the sheet, it was preserved as a precious testimony of a supreme and an intelligent hand. It was a labor of love to bring this drawing for the first time over the oceans. In Dresden, we decided to do so as we are convinced the drawing will open many minds and hearts and will offer a once-in-a-lifetime experience for many people in this city, speaking to their own creativity. In regard to subtle balance between mimetic description of nature and evocation, between precision and looseness, joined through creative imagination, Van Eyck's drawing finds a counterpart in Hans Holbein's portrait of Charles de Soulier, as well as in Caspar David Friedrich's drawings, and I would just like to point out his extraordinarily beautiful sepia seascape with a stony beach. It was probably executed late in Friedrich's career, in about 1535 to 37, after he had suffered a stroke. The Dresden collection has strong holdings of the master's drawings. Friedrich moved to Dresden in 1798 in his mid-20s and died in the city in 1840, when this drawing was acquired from the artist's widow, Caroline. Whether it depicts a moonrise or a setting sun has still not been decided, and it will probably always remain an open question, as Friedrich did not capture the scene after life, but constructed it freely, combining in the view areas nourished by his memory and motifs such as the stones and rocks recorded in his earlier detailed studies. He thus created a tangible but sublime world of light and air that resonates with the viewer's inner selves and beliefs, and may serve as a sounding board for our hopes and longings as it presents to us a nature that speaks to the soul. The 19th century was throughout a period of exciting expansion and experimentation for the Kupferstich-Kabinett, as Dresden was an artistic hotspot with artists like Singh, Schnorr von Karolsfeld, Oehme, and Ludwig Richter working in the city. The directors Frenzel and Gruner were painters and printmakers themselves and secured strong groups of works by contemporary artists and artist collectors, such as the important portrait collection of Carl Christian Vogel von Vogelstein. Gruner also made major acquisitions of old masters at the London Christie's sale of Samuel Woodburn in 1860, where, among other works, the drawings by Holbein and Correggio were bought, linking these to the paintings that had already been acquired for the Gemäldegalerie, both on view here. Seminal for our institution today was, however, the 20th century, with two towering figures as museum leaders, Max Lears and Werner Schmidt. It is here not the time to speak in detail about their achievements, nor in some depth of the 20th century works in our collection. I would, however, like to end with a few remarks on Lears and Schmidt's take on our topic, keeping in the present, as both strongly shaped the future of the collection. Max Lears was a scholar of early Northern print culture and author of the groundbreaking History and Catalogue Raisonné of the German, Netherlandish, and French engravings of the 15th century, its 9 volumes published from 1908 to 1934. As a print scholar, he built on the legacy of well-connected Heinrich von Heinecken, Dresden's second director, active under Augustus the Strong's son. Heinecken would have deserved an own lecture, as he had established the Kupferstich-Kabinett as one of the foremost print collections in Europe. In his time, Heinecken embraced new developments in printmaking, as did Max Lears. In close collaboration with Woldemar von Seydlitz, Lears decided in 1898 to include photography as artistic medium in the collection, as he considered it the reproductive medium of the future. Lears also started to collect posters, reasoning that the public would need a trigger to come and engage more deeply with early prints and drawings. He firmly believed that the fresh stimulus of street life, with poster images everywhere, should be embraced by the museum to help raise the understanding of the wonders of the past masters and their relevance for their understanding of and active engagement with the present. He was searching for dialogue between past and present, and I must admit Max Lears is my big hero. He became director of the Kupferstich-Kabinett in 1896 and presented a first exhibition of posters predominantly by French, but also by Belgian, German, Austrian, and American artists. In his publication of the Cabinet's holdings, Lears included 142 posters, 12 by Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec. With the support of Seydlitz, a large number of contemporary French works by Manet, Degas, Vuillard, Bonnat, Carrière, Forain, but also of Whistler were acquired, and more than 60 lithographs by Lautrec. Thanking the Kupferstich-Kabinett for its strong commitment to his son's work, Toulouse-Lautrec's mother donated 4 drawings in memory of her late son in 1904, one being the ravishing red chalk drawing of Misia Nathason playing the piano here in the slide and on view in the exhibition. Whilst it was Woldemar von Seydlitz who needs to be credited for having foregrounded modern French artists, it was Lears who built up and cultivated a remarkably close relationship to Käthe Kollwitz, supporting her from early on and staying in close conversation throughout her career, as shown by their correspondence. Her extraordinary talent, innovation, and power as a printmaker, an art not usually practiced by women, was remarkable. So are her drawings, of which her powerful and enigmatic self-portrait of 1911 gives vivid proof of. During the time of the GDR, under the direction of Werner Schmidt, the Kupferstich-Kabinett was a focal point for numerous nonconformist contemporary artists such as Hermann Glöckner, Gerhard Altenburg, Carl Friedrich Claus, and Penck, to name just those artists of whom we have chosen works for our exhibition. These relationships have resulted in exceptional groups of works in the Kupferstich-Kabinett's collection, some of which were created in dialogue with the museum. As the museum world is currently in the midst of reconsidering the canon of great masters, it seems a very good moment to introduce some of these little-known artists from the East Germany in an exquisitely curated master drawings show here in New York City. During his long years as a director, throughout the time of the GDR and beyond, Werner Schmidt opened the gates wide to art from socialist countries in Eastern Europe and Russia. At the same time, he did not lose sight of Western art, including the USA, and succeeded in strengthening the collection by major contemporary artists. As importantly, during Schmidt's tenure, the Kupferstich-Kabinett with its study room developed in the time of the GDR into a place that to gather and discuss non-conformist art. Prints, always having been the predominant medium in our collection, united the friends of the museum with the artists, as many could afford and collect works, produced in a time when the freedom of public art was restricted. The intimacy of the Kupferstich-Kabinett with its collection of works on paper, so huge but hidden from view, allowed the acquisition and also the discussion of works by artists, otherwise publicly sanctioned and dismissed. It is this character of a secluded, protected space that Gerhard Altenburg meant when he called a drawing produced on the basis of a poster of the Kupferstich-Kabinett's Rembrandt exhibition of 1969, From the Sacred Woods. These sacred woods were, to him and are, the cabinet. Still a place to encounter a universe of wonders, as was its earliest nucleus, the Kunstkammer. The Kupferstich-Kabinett continues to be a collecting institution growing through acquisitions and gifts and by working closely with living artists. Last example here is Baselitz's Eagle. Although our means are very limited, we marked our 300th anniversary with a group of wonderful acquisitions with a great help by generous friends. One of our prides and a true passion is our public study room. As our Director General, Marion Ackermann, always says, the most democratic place of our 15 museums. It is open to everyone, a place for dialogue between people and works of art. Most of the time, a calm place for close looking, conversation, and discovery, where you can choose yourself, without entrance fee, by the way, what you would like to study, but also often a very lively spot, at least before the pandemic shut us down. And here you see a conversation of artists' book, not yet acquired and still owned by the artists. Otherwise, we would use gloves. Yeah. This is Christine Schlegel next to me here. Well, don't go into detail now. So. Moreover, we use the study room as an extended gallery space where performances may happen as the one by the artist duo Prince Ghulam, and where, no, oh yeah, you can have a look at it already. Public displays highlight works from past and present, often across media. One of my favorite dialogues in the last year was 7 Shades of White that you very briefly only saw, a beautiful juxtaposition of porcelain copies from Agassiz the Strong's collection and sketchbooks from the Kupferstich-Kabinett that was opened on blank pages. Thus, let me end with an invitation to you all to come to Dresden, where me and my colleagues would be delighted to welcome you. And I wanted to say in the end, please bear with me for another 1.5 minutes. Now it's another half minute, when I show you a little film that we show in the public foyer of the print room, without tone, not to disturb the visitors in the nearby exhibition space. And essentially, it just shows you how to use a print room, because the one thing that I learned, in the various print rooms in the world where I worked, is that everybody says it's so hard to get access. And to ring a bell, doesn't seem to be so difficult as we try to show here. Thank you very much.
That was a tour de force. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining. I don't think we use gloves, but come and visit us and come and visit the exhibition, which is one of 4 exhibitions up at the moment, and there will be more programming as we go through. But Steffi, again, it was a really splendid overview of the origins and the development of the Kupferstich, and of course of some of your passionate research and moving research on the Van Eyck drawing as well. Thank you all for coming. Have a good weekend.